As the launch of the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One consoles loomed, there was one game that had captured the media for first-person shooters: Battlefield 4. Continuing from the success of its predecessor, this game was offering massive scale and incredible graphical fidelity for what we'd seen at the time. But it wasn't going to have everything its own way, as we'll be covering all of that as I revisit Battlefield 4. Yes, Fishing from Baku, the scenes that had our jaws dropped watching this being previewed at E3, how they got the graphics to look so good for the first game on the new generation of consoles, how they managed to get the facial animations to actually look pretty good and pretty realistic was impressive. But unfortunately, the beauty of this game really was only skin deep. It really suffered from a pure lack of enjoyment in the overall gameplay. The set pieces, in my opinion, were actually quite good. The narrative was also okay, but it never made up for the fact that the gameplay itself was pretty boring to play through. It just didn't have any mechanics or any atmosphere that made it feel like a wow moment, and overall it just wasn't that much of an enjoyable experience, especially when you couple with it the fact that the game seemed to be designed, as many first-person shooters were at this point, that the first-person player must do everything. It's a very frustrating bit of game design, and they try to weave this into the story as well, with your character being the squad leader who never actually takes charge of the squad at any single point in the campaign, and you have to decide when or not your squad fights. They added in the engage system, so when you spotted enemies, your squad would at last shoot back. Or at least that was supposed to be the idea, but in reality you'd spot them and just get to watch your squad seemingly ignore them, or just not be able to hit them. Yeah, US military. But it was overall a just lacking gameplay experience. The set pieces were actually pretty good in places and were pretty well directed. I really enjoyed the speech before the attack on Singapore. That was a really good set piece in my opinion. Yeah, I admit I'm a bit of a sucker for like a war speech, but I thought that was really good and that really did build some atmosphere. But it just didn't ever make up for the fact that the gameplay was not that enjoyable. The only reason I enjoyed it while I was replaying it was actually for reasons that I don't ever remember encountering when I played it originally. And that was a lot of bugs I encountered that I do not remember ever seeing before. And quite frankly, they were glorious at times. The most common one I came across was my soldier randomly leaning for no reason. I could not control it. The soldier would just all of a sudden be like, I'm going to lean right now. And you might have thought that because my character was on a boat, maybe they were counteracting the motion of the boat. But no, like I just spawned in on the random side of a mountain. Yep, gonna lean. You want to listen to a briefing? Time to lean. You asked to do manual labour? It's leaning time. You going down an elevator? Well, where better place to start leaning? Angry about respawning? Lean. Just started a prison breakout? Do some small leans. You don't want the other prisoners to take the piss out of you. But for those of you who might actually think that this was actually just me pissing about, the auto-leaning feature is turned off by default and greyed out. There is no way for you to turn it on console anymore. I just don't know why this was happening, and it even did happen in multiplayer a bit. What was even better, this was just the tip of the iceberg of the bugs I encountered while I was replaying it. Like this particular bug where you're trying to go full incognito in Shanghai. Like no one's going to notice a civilian just casually morphing through a truck. Who would ever notice such a thing? Or perhaps when you're watching a rousing cutscene where Irish decides to do the right thing and help the civilians, but just in case it was getting a bit too rousing, you got a little comedy boop at the end. And what's more, in case it wasn't satisfied of how buggy it was in multiplayer, the knife could not be left out of the bugs experienced in the campaign. And then you've also got trees being trees, I guess? And what's more, even the props weren't left out of this.
What? I don't have a problem with women, I got a problem with liars!
And what's more, the game would even try and put glitches in whilst it thought you wasn't looking. Like, what even is this? But you know, a bug would never be perfect without some more unnecessary leaning. It was just comical, the amount of glitches that I'm pretty sure I've never encountered before. And unfortunately, they were the only thing that I really enjoyed going back through this campaign. The set pieces were nice, but the gameplay was still, as I remembered, to be pretty bland and uninspiring. But fortunately, the multiplayer more than made up for the campaign. but it took quite a while to get there. Unfortunately, when the game released, the multiplayer was riddled by bugs, game crashes on almost all systems, and poor netcode performance. And unfortunately for me, I didn't enjoy it. I wasn't enjoying the experience of playing the game. I can't remember my exact reasons for it, but I do remember for the first year or so, I've just felt frustrated at the game. And I spent most of the time just playing Call of Duty Ghosts instead. But credit to the developers, they could have just said, nah, screw this hasn't worked, we're going to bugger off and just take the money. But no, they kept at it, they kept working, and over the next year, whilst also adding in 3 new expansions to the game, they also started fixing the bugs, the crashes, and the netcode problems, to the point where in the September of the following year, the game was in a really good state. It had way better performance, and they went through and fixed a load of the problems with the original map design, especially for the Rush game mode, which is my personal favourite. They went through, reworked the objectives, tried to make sure that players could no longer get on buildings that they weren't supposed to, which was ruining the flow of some maps. Yep, Siege of Shanghai, you are the main culprit here. And it was a major change for the game, and it made it so much more enjoyable and just so much more playable. And from here onwards, it started to become my main game, especially as the next Call of Duty title, Advanced Warfare, wasn't quite to my taste. And the game then continued to go from strength to strength, as well as continuing to improve, rolling out higher tick rate servers and general improved infrastructure for the game. They then also just started adding free content. They added in the night version of Zavod 311, Zavod Graveyard Shift. They then eventually did the community map project, which was fantastic, where they got the community to input what they wanted the map to be, and then they put early development versions on the community test environment for players to test out, and ultimately let the community guide what the map Operation Outbreak eventually became. And to be honest, it's one of my favourite maps in the game, partly because of the community involvement, but I actually just really enjoy the layout and the flow of it, and it was just a fantastic bit of developer community bonding, because they gave us the tools and the ability to actually shape a level that is in the game and see how maps progress and how they go from early development and concepts all the way to the finished product. It was a really great bit of engagement of the community. They also added in the free weapon DLC and eventually added in the remaster of Dragon Valley, which also is one of my favourite levels in the entire game. And it's this goodwill of committing to fix the game and then providing free updates and content for all players to enjoy was just really well received by players, and myself especially. I loved that. The fact that they stuck with the game, they saw its potential, and they helped it realise it by supporting the game and not giving up on it. And that is something I will give them credit for till the end of time, because it eventually allowed me to enjoy this game as much as I do. And then what's more, in the final year of this game's life cycle, when Battlefield 1 was getting hyped up and getting ready to be released, they allowed players to download all of the previous paid-for expansions for free. This allowed more and more players to experience the extra levels that had been added to the game, and just overall gave a really positive sentiment towards the community. I got to experience all these levels, which I previously never would have because I wasn't interested in buying premium because of the originally buggy state the game was launched in. I now got to experience it. I got to unlock all the weapons that got added in, and it was just so much fun. It eventually led to this game becoming the most successful game I've ever had on this channel. During that final year of Battlefield 4, the videos I was releasing were getting the most views, I saw the most growth on this channel, and it led to the most successful video I've ever seen on this channel, which was my anti-air mine kill tutorial. This came about because there was this one gadget in the game which you could place down and it would automatically lock onto air vehicles, but there was an achievement to get a kill with this gadget, and it was a very difficult achievement, because if it came up against a jet or a helicopter, which are the predominant air vehicles in the game, if it locks onto one of those, it will usually only disable them in one shot. So you're never actually going to get the kill very reliably, because they'll just fly away and repair, and they won't go near your mine again. And this was until I was playing on the Final Stand DLC, where you had the drop pods. And I was there just playing through a random match on Hangar 21, got into the drop pod trying to fire myself up the mountain, and then all of a sudden I got killed by one of these anti-air mines by another player. And I was absolutely gobsmacked. I'd never been killed by one of these. I'd only ever seen people placing them on mountains hoping that it would hit a stray helicopter. And I'd all of a sudden been taken out by one of these with almost no time to react. So my initial thought was, whoa, that seems weird. I'll get my own one and try that as well. So I respawned in at the top of the mountain, put my AA mine near to the drop pods, and lo and behold, The same player who had just killed me was in the drop pod, and it locked onto them and instantly killed them, granting me the achievement as well. And it was awesome. No one else on YouTube seemed to have found a reliable way of doing it, and just completely randomly, me and this random player, who never spoke in-game, never spoke again, I've never had any contact with them, just randomly came across this strategy, which worked perfectly. So of course I made the video about it, and it became successful. It's probably the only one which I've uploaded and known it was going to be a hit, because I knew that other people wanted to know how to do this. There were loads of AA mines being littered around the maps, but none of them were getting kills. I did have one person being an arsehole in the comments, but they quite frankly should have checked themselves before they wrecked themselves. But it was the fact that they added in all of these expansions allowed this to happen, and as I said before, it just created this amazing sentiment of goodwill towards the community. And ultimately, it means that I still think really fondly of this game, because as well as all of this support they gave for it, the game itself was really fun and was incredibly rich in content. There were loads of different weapons and gadgets for players to use, which encouraged very different playstyles and different masteries to get the best out of them. I got to replay and use some of my favourite weapons from back in the day, getting to use the CBJ nail gun PDW, using the M4, which was one of my favourite carbines, and also going back and using the M40A5, which was the sniper rifle that I used the most frequently. But the things that I wasn't expecting was to still enjoy the game as though it was the main battlefield. I got to go back and play Conquest, which in more recent titles hasn't been an enjoyable experience. It seems to be more fitting for a Benny Hill sketch than an enjoyable multiplayer experience. But in Battlefield 4, you get that tug-of-war. One team will go up and assault the flag and capture it, but then the other team launches a counter wave and you've got to try and hold them off before they can cap the point back. And that's just not happened in any of the subsequent games. And I loved that. I wasn't expecting to be able to enjoy Conquest. I thought it was going to play out much like I remembered some of the subsequent titles. But it was so much fun, it was so satisfying, and gave you those almost single-player-esque moments. But I also got to go back and enjoy the Rush game mode. This game mode has, and probably always will be, my favourite mode in Battlefield, because it takes the objective focus of other modes and absolutely concentrates it into much smaller areas. The aim of the game is that the attacking team has to destroy 2 MCOM stations by blowing them up. It's kind of like a bomb plant and bomb defusal kind of mode. And each game almost has its own narrative, where you start off on the first base and you manage to slog your way through it and get through that first base. You start to advance through the level, through different areas of combat, sometimes moving from wide open spaces into suddenly tight urban infantry focused combat, and you get to progress through the level, eventually getting to that final base and winning the game. And it just gave each match a narrative which was so enthralling and it was so entertaining. And whilst it may not have the same incredible hype moments of perhaps getting a clutch in an incredibly competitive game like Rainbow Six Siege, it gave the players so much more opportunity for clutch plays, getting a really awesome flank and suddenly opening up an entire half of the map for your team. Or perhaps when the enemies have the last MCOM armed and you manage to dive onto it, guns blazing, and get a clutch defuse. It feels so satisfying, and I wasn't ready for how much it would take me back to what I loved about this game. There were a couple of things that I go back and I'm still not particularly fond of. The main one of those is the jet combat. The jets in this game for me feel incredibly clunky. I'm not a good jet pilot, I can admit that. I absolutely suck, my target acquisition's terrible, I'm rubbish at evasive manoeuvres, and I can just about control the thing. But the thing that annoyed me most in this game was that once you get to a certain damage threshold, you suddenly get mobility hit, and this means that you suddenly lose a lot of directional control of the jet and it can no longer really steer. And that was an incredibly frustrating mechanic. Going back and playing Air Superiority, it was difficult for me to get kills. It would take a while because my aim wasn't particularly good and I wasn't very stable when controlling the jet. But when I did get on someone's tail and I was slowly whittling down their health, it would suck when I got them a few points away from getting the disable, which would eventually grant me the kill, to suddenly have someone do that tiny threshold of damage to disable me briefly, and then all of a sudden I've lost my target and I cannot finish off that kill. It felt demoralising, because it's almost like I cannot learn anything from that combat. I don't necessarily think that jets should be easy, and I do relish the challenge of something that is that difficult, but the problem was it made it feel almost impossible for a player like myself who isn't good at it to get kills, if anyone who is even vaguely competent is in the game, and that's why I dislike that mechanic. But it wasn't ever enough to take away from the sheer scale and fun factor of this game. The absolute sandbox that you could go in as an infantry player, trying to revive your teammates, drop ammo, or play a long range recon. Or perhaps you wanted to be a helicopter pilot, going in the scout, attack, or even transport helicopters to get your team to and from the next objective. Or perhaps you wanted to be a ground vehicle specialist, going into the main battle tanks or infantry fighting vehicles. It just gave this game a major feeling of scale, and it kind of gave each match a narrative. There were some maps that were less interesting, like Silk Road, just evolved into tanks camping on the ridges. But overall, this game has something which no game has actually managed to capture yet. And whilst the last couple of games haven't quite floated my boat, going back and replaying Battlefield 4 has confirmed that there is a spot in my games library for another Battlefield game. So here's to hoping that the next one will be able to recapture the magic that Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4 managed to. But I'm interested to hear what your experiences were on this game. Did you have similar experiences to me? Did you perhaps come into the game a bit later so all the bugs had already been cleared out? I'm interested to hear what you think in the comment section down below. If you have enjoyed the video, please do feel free to like it and subscribe if you want to see more. I've been the guy from the Gamertag, and I'll see you on another video.